Church, welcome once again to week 2 of You Can Do This. If you're new, we are doing something a little different during this series. We are having a conversation between myself and mine and Kristen's personal therapist, Hud McWilliams, and we are combining the biblical and the clinical. And these conversations have already proven to be beneficial and impactful. We are hearing stories from groups that are meeting throughout the week, as well as families just having deeper dialogue within the home. And so we are excited for you to join us. So here is week 2 of You Can Do This. Well, Hud, one thing that I'm just thrilled for you to share with others is whether we call it the drama triangle or the victim paradigm. This is something that I've seen you teach on, and I just think it's brilliant. And so would you take us through what you would call as the drama triangle?
Okay, I think the importance of this, from my point of view, is that we live in a guilt and innocence culture. Most of the cultures, or many of the cultures in the world, are shame and honor cultures. Our culture...
You're talking like East versus West.
Right, yeah. Pretty much. But guilt and innocence is where we look for somebody to blame, and it's why our culture is so litigious. We'll sue anybody for anything under any circumstances. And it's kind of a mindset. And so the blame story or the blame triangle, it comes from that context. And so it's promulgated by that. But we're not the only culture that does it. It just is more prominent here. So people have thought about this a lot. So there's lots of ways to look at it. But the thing you need to know is that the victim triangle feeds on itself, and it stays alive over a long period of time. So I like to draw it and maybe explain it then a little bit that way. So the triangle, the way it's drawn matters because the triangle point is at the bottom, and that's where most of us find ourselves in this, and it's where you find the victim. And when we feel like we're a victim of something, we find ourselves looking for somebody to blame, right? And usually the blameworthy figure is somebody that's perpetrated or bullied or powered up, or we feel less than, however you want to frame it. And so that's either a perpetrator, or sometimes it's known as the villain. The bad guy, the guy that causes you to be a victim. And then in order to complete the triangle, you need somebody to step in and try to help, and we call that rescue. Now, I've been in the church my whole life, and I'm in the business of trying to help people. And help then becomes a 4-letter word, and I put it in quotes here. Most of what we do in the church a lot of times is try to rescue victims. The problem is it keeps people infant, it keeps people dependent, it keeps people kind of in a victim model, and you actually want a healthy model. So I'm going to draw another triangle here in a minute that gives you an alternative to this. The problem is most people function here because blame is such a fun game. If I can blame you, then I don't have to take responsibility. If I can charge you with this, if I can be a victim of.
And it's lazy, right? Like I've always said that blame is a lazy person's way of making sense out of chaos. It's I don't want to put in the work to deal with this issue.
That's right. And if I can blame you, it absolves me of having to take ownership, right? So because I was traumatized, let's say, as a child, therefore I'm this way. I tell my own story a little bit in the book and that I wrote, and I talk about how my dad's history set him up to be insecure. And guess what I picked up as a child? Well, I picked up insecurity. Do I have a reason to be insecure? Not like he did. No obvious cause for it, but I function out of insecurity, and I can give you example after example out of my own life well into my adult years. Am I insecure today? Yes. Why? Because I practiced it for such a long time. I still carry it around, but I'm much more aware of it. And the awareness is a key ingredient in whether I stay here. I don't blame my dad.
Okay.
I take ownership now of the fact that that's a practiced bent of mine, and I can push back against it. I can say, oh, there it is again. You can just sit down here, you know, in security, and I'll talk to you later. So I wouldn't be doing this with you if I had acted out of that insecurity. I wouldn't. But I can be here even though I know that that's a component in my history. So I'm not blaming my dad, and that means I got off of this triangle in some way. Rescuing is what we call love a lot of times. And my profession, the helping profession or ministry or people in medicine or even government, all that is a rescue-oriented mindset. And it's a product of the fall, actually. So when you get into this role, rescuing means that we're going to help these people. And it's kind of a power thing. I'm going to solve your problem. I'm going to fix you. I'm going to give you and a lot of self-help books come out of rescuing.
It's a Messiah complex, though.
Yeah. I'm
the savior here.
I'm the savior here. So one of the things that I would say, one of the phrases I would have you use is be actively anti-blame, anti-victim. Every time you feel you want to blame somebody, or every time you feel like a victim, identify it, push back against it, start asking some questions.
Be anti-blame and anti-victim.
Yes, so the healthy triangle, it flips this triangle up, going the other direction, and it moves the victim up here at the very top now, instead of at the very bottom, and he or she is a creator. I just like the word. Because we're made in the image of God, the creator means that you take responsibility for your life. I'm trying to say that about my own life. I take responsibility for the fact that I'm a psychologist. I never chose to be one, in a sense. Consciously, I didn't go after it thinking, oh my goodness, I need to do this. But I am.
Is that rare? Because I feel like there was a point for me, I set out to become a pastor.
Sure.
So when you explain your experience, that seems unique to me.
It is. It's weird.
Okay.
You know, but it's.
But you're not saying like that's how it should be for everybody.
No, absolutely not. I mean, you know, yay God that He had you chosen and gave you that insight, and you moved toward it and embraced it, right? I just think, in my case, that didn't happen, right? So it's just my case.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's a great corrective. But being a creator means that you take ownership of your choice, right? You still had to make that choice. I made a choice to be a psychologist.
Yeah.
I made it different than you, but it's still, I'm taking ownership. And that's what would go in the middle here. Ownership,
Okay.
or responsibility. And when you take ownership or responsibility, it changes the dynamic radically from blame.
Yeah.
I'm trying to say, I didn't cause the cancer, but I'm going to own how I deal with it.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what a creator does. They think creatively about the choices they have still in front of them. Maybe the choice is narrow because of an illness or narrow because of a lost job, but it doesn't mean you're choiceless.
Yeah.
And that was what Viktor Frankl talked about, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He says, you still have a choice. Nobody can take away the final choice. And the final choice is how you choose to look at something, how you choose to perceive something.
Now, is that part of the faultiness in how we understand and interpret our trauma?
Sure.
That it's not to say trauma doesn't exist or that you didn't have terrible experiences, but you still have a choice. And I think we've talked about this, that cause and effect, where this type of experience always leads to this type of outcome. Well, no, that's not always the case. You have a choice in the matter. And I think some people, they're really cause and effect in their thinking.
Well, we found out a major study done on trauma and victimhood out of the sand wars in the Middle East during later in my life. They followed 10,000 soldiers that had been deployed into battle. And they found out that PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, actually triggered unprocessed childhood trauma.
Yeah.
It was not the trauma of deployment and battle that was the major issue. It was what it triggered, and it triggered lack of development in a child, which was stunning.
Wow.
So it means that something happens to us
Yeah.
as children, and you can have two children grow up in the same family, one be traumatized and the other fine. And so it's the way the child perceives it. So that may be personality, it may be, DNA, structural resilience.
Is that something you can teach?
Sure.
Like there's just not some people who are just instinctively wired with this type of perspective and outlook. This one's an optimist, this one's a pessimist. This is a behavior you can learn.
Well, you can learn to be emotionally healthy, yes.
Okay.
And I think wholeness demands it. So that's what we're talking about here. So this upper triangle is a healthy triangle. And the thing I'd like to emphasize here is the difference between rescuing and nurturing somebody.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that happens to us theologically a lot of times. We want God to rescue us, and many of our prayers are rescue me prayers, right? Bless me prayers, fix me prayers, get me out of this, find me a parking space, heal this disease, whatever, which is not wrong. However, I think God primarily wants to nurture us. He wants us to take responsibility because he made us what? In his image, like him.
Yeah.
And he wants us to take ownership, and he calls us co-creators and co-participants, co-regents in this world. So we are to bring in the kingdom. We are to cooperate with him. We are to be in league with him. And Jesus goes so far as to call us his friends.
Wow.
In John 15. And a lot of times when we talk about that passage, I've had pastors push back against that over and over again, saying, I can't teach that. People think that's too flippant about the Godhead. But God wants to what? Eat dinner with you and, I don't know,
But would
take
you
a
even
walk.
say that hints at the pastor's development?
Sure.
Because you can't teach on something you're not confident that you've experienced yourself.
Well, you can teach on it, sadly.
Yeah.
But if it's not true in your life, there's a disconnect, right?
And that's what they're expressing, right?
Yes, I think so often wholeness is not what we go after. We go after something that will sell or something, and I've done this my whole life. I've slowly learned that I've got to put this stuff into practice in my own life, or I don't want to talk about it, because if it's not authentic, if it's not real, if I can't trust it, I don't want to say it to you and say, oh yeah, this is posture this way and you'll feel better. I want it to be substantive. I want it to be transformative in your life. I want you to be able to access wholeness regardless of your history, regardless of your personality, regardless of your experience. And then over here is a coach. So these are movements of health away from being a perpetrator is to being a coach, taking the same energy and redeeming it. So this is a redemptive view of the very same thing that we're talking about here. But most people get caught in this.
Now, so say you're someone currently as the victim. You've been through something, you're placing blame. Is the advice to say, as the individual, you need to go find a coach or a nurturer?
Yeah, but more than that, you need to take ownership of what has happened to you so your story is clear. What happens to most victims, if they don't deal with their own stuff internally, they become villains or perpetrators.
Yeah.
So, because it's what they know. They experienced it, and unless it's broken up somehow and moved to responsibility and ownership, they stay in this blame model, and then they wind up playing all three roles here eventually.
Which is, it makes me think of David and Saul throwing spears at him, and
Absolutely.
The ability to not pick one up and throw it back.
Well, and that is, and look at what Abigail did with him, when he wanted to vindicate himself.
Yeah.
Said this was unfair, and it was unfair. Well, being a victim is unfair by definition. And he was saying, this is unfair, I'm going to bring about justice. And Abigail said, don't you vindicate yourself.
Yeah.
And to David's credit, he listened to her. And
Man, that's such a message just for, I think, the body of Christ at large. don't you vindicate yourself.
Let God do it.
Let God do it.
That's Romans 12. He actually says, vengeance is mine. I will repay. You let go of it. Our natural tendency is to blame and then to bring about justice. I live with a gal that likes justice, and she hates unfairness, and she knows where that came from. It came from her own history. And it's triggered every time something's unfair. You know, the guy didn't do his job at the mechanic didn't change the oil the right way, or, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or the milk's bad, and so we have to take it back to the store, or, you know, whatever. And there's some truth to all that stuff, but the bottom line is, you want to be healthy?
Yeah.
You're gonna take ownership here, and you're gonna realize that the world is fallen and broken and doesn't go in a straight line, and it doesn't work the way it's supposed to work, and you have to adapt to it, and you are to bring love into that setting. You are to absorb the craziness of the world, just like the cross absorbed our sin, so that we can participate in this world in a more robust, healthy, full-orbed way. And you think about the disciples. This is still blows me away today. The disciples moved from thinking like this bottom triangle, to taking ownership, and guess what happened to them? All but one of them was martyred.
Yeah.
And Jesus said, you're going to have more power than I have, and you're going to do greater things than I do. And they all died. And we would consider that a failure, but we don't talk about that very much.
Yeah.
We want this miraculous working power, quote unquote, to rescue us. And here's what Paul says in Colossians 1:11. He's praying for these churches, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, same prayer, it's pretty much. Colossians 1:11 says, I pray that you will have all power. Think all power, man, I want all power. Why? To rescue? He says no, to patiently endure. So most people, if they're given all power, don't want to put it in patience and endurance.
Yeah.
Or perseverance, right? They want to put it into rescuing, changing something, making it right.
So talk about, because I think a lot of times, a lot of people find themselves in that rescuer nurture tension.
That's right.
Someone comes to them, you know, and they're in that victim mindset and they need help. What advice do you have for the person to say, I'm not going to become a rescuer, I'm not going to become enabling, I'm not going to permit this person to stay stuck in this framework? What are practical things they can do to choose being a nurturer over a rescuer?
Okay, so in the bottom triangle, the rescuer wants to solve or fix the issue. So solutions become the major thing. I was a professor for a long time in university, and what I know our education does is it forces people to try to learn to have a solution for everything. Well, that's a linear thinking process. It's not wrong, and I'm glad there's closed systems like a plane, for instance. I'm glad I'm going to fly home tomorrow, and I want the plane not to make a decision on the runway for one engine to say, I don't want to go on this.
Okay.
You know, I want it to do what it's supposed to do. So there are places, but in living, living isn't a problem to be fixed or solved. Living is a problem, is a challenge to deal with the tension that's caused by, you know, being victimized in some way. Well, being victimized doesn't necessarily make you a victim. It just means that you have to deal with it. And so it's not your fault, you're a victim, but it is your fault if you stay there. So the rescuer, which is our...
And do you find that a lot of people in that victim space are offended by what you just said?
Sure. Good catch.
But as a nurturer, and I would say that would have to be the distinction in the nurturer, a rescuer doesn't tell them that. A nurturer says, you can't stay there.
Yeah. A nurturer comes alongside. I find myself writing sometimes to people now, and I say, I'm alongside of you. I can't fix you. I can't get you out of the pain you're in. You know, you lost your wife, or this dastardly thing happened to you, or you're going through this awful thing. I can only offer them me. I can't fix it. I can't bring that person back to life, etc. We think those are the solutions.
Or you can't take And this is something that like I've struggled with, where there's a difference between taking care and caretaking.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can be caring and you can be thoughtful and you can be gentle, but a caretaker like moves into the house. A caretaker is with you in the middle of the night. They're making breakfast, doing your laundry. I mean, they're assuming an abnormal amount of responsibility. And I think that's the temptation, is to take too much responsibility to the point of allowing them to never take ownership.
Yeah, so they become dependent on you, and you feel strong.
Which
Is
the rescuer
rescuer.
secretly is validated by.
And this is my business. I'm in the business of, quote, helping people. But the question is, am I going to help them, trying to rescue them, solve their problem, fix it, or am I going to try to help them become stronger in the way that they deal with their own life in a more robust way, so they take ownership and they're not working out of scarcity, they're working out of abundance. And that's exactly what the biblical message is. God says, he says, I came that you may have life in full. Now, or in abundance. One of either word's translated. Full life. He's not saying, well, I came so you could have mostly good stuff. No, full. And I take that means full.
Yeah.
And that means full in a fallen world. That means that I can grapple with the tribulation that's in the world, and that's what he says. He says, take heart, doesn't he? He says, take heart, I've overcome the world. In the world, you will have tribulation. It's not an option. So you will have tribulation. Are you going to be on the victim end of it, or are you going to take ownership?
So tell me, like, I'll tell you a story and you just give me feedback,
Okay.
whether or not this was the right approach or helpful at all. So years ago, Kristen and I were pastoring a church, and a couple comes and asks if they can meet with us. And so we go out to dinner with them, and they share a pretty unique situation that they'd gone through. And it was regarding their marriage. And so Kristen and I, we said, hey, we're committed to come alongside you guys. And how we're going to do so is we're going to read a book together. And so here's what we're going to do. Let's read this book. Kristen and I will read it. The two of you read it, and then let's find time once we're done reading it to get back together and discuss the book. Mainly because what they were going through wasn't a part of mine and Kristen's experience. So we were like, hey, we should probably inform ourselves as well.
Sure.
So Kristen and I dig through this book, and the couple starts reaching out to us a few weeks later, like, hey, can we get that dinner on the calendar? And I asked him, I said, well, have you read the book? And I no, we haven't got around to the book yet, but we need to lock down this dinner. And I said, well, again, let's stick to the plan. You got to read the book. And this became a thing where, like, they just wouldn't read the book, but they still wanted to meet. And maybe it was stubbornness, but I just couldn't give in and be like, all right, let's meet, even though you're not doing your part. So eventually the family left the church. And I was like torn by that, but also perplexed. Here, Kristen and I were reading a book for your marriage that they weren't willing to do themselves. Now, was that poor leadership? Is there things that I could have done better in that moment? I feel like that's somewhere in the tension of rescuing and nurturing and getting them to take ownership.
It triggers the thought. There's this great parable of Jesus facing the rich young ruler, and the guy says, what must I do to be saved? And Jesus says, well, you've got to do the law. And the most arrogant statement maybe in all of Scripture comes back, I've done the law. Oh, really?
Right.
He doesn't say that, but I would have said that. That's why about Jesus. Anyway, I said, really? Anyway, and then Jesus kind of ignores that. And because the guy's like, well, I answered your question, what more do you want? Now I answer mine. And so Jesus says, well, in your case, because you're addicted to or you're worshiping stuff, you need to liquidate your stuff, give it to the poor, and come and follow me. And the rich young ruler walks away. And it's fascinating what Jesus does. He lets him walk away. He's not yelling at him as he goes down the street saying, hey, I'm Jesus, you're missing this. This is a big opportunity. Guess what? 10 more seconds, 10 more steps, and it's off the table. None of that. He lets him go. And my hunch is he's allowing him to face the consequences of his own choice.
Yeah.
More fully than he would have had Jesus chased him down. And we're more likely to see that guy in heaven, I think, than if Jesus would have rescued him.
Yeah.
And Jesus didn't heal everybody. And all healing, as I think C.S. Lewis says, or maybe it's Francis Schaeffer, or both of them, all healing is limited. None of it's perfect and none of it's complete. And Lazarus died again after being raised from the dead. And would it make it less of a miracle if Lazarus died within 30 minutes rather than 30 days? Absolutely not.
Which is a super funny story to think about.
Well,
I wonder what it was like the second time he passed it.
It is. You're going, why do I have to die again? My gosh, this is awful, you know?
That's hilarious.
I just think but we don't think about that stuff in kind of real time. And so what this did for me is I began to realize most people like being here because it's a godlike position. If I can blame and be a victim, that's all legal talk. If I take ownership, that's freedom talk. That's talk about actual accessing joy regardless of my circumstances. This is being a victim of my circumstances, whether they be perpetrated on me or I just live in them or whatever. Why do the happiest people in the world happen to be the poorest in many cases? Mm-hmm. Here we are, some of the richest people in the world, and we're not very happy. And even anyway, we could just go on and talk about all those stories, but this component is super helpful if we just pause just a second, take a breath, do a little reflection, and realize this is what I'm made for. This is nurturing something as an art form.
Yeah.
Rescuing is a power play. Sometimes we need to be rescued. I get that. That's not wrong, but you don't want to stay there.
Yeah, these two seem nuanced. Rescuing and nurturing, there's that distinction that you have to figure out. This side, I think is, obviously you can tell a villain, you can tell the perpetrator, right?
A bully, yeah.
But the coach, distinguish between nurture and coach.
Well, I got to coach a team, a high school football team. And because I was so insecure as a kid, I didn't like being coached because coaching always felt like they were telling me I was doing something wrong.
Yeah.
I needed to fix something. I was bad, that's how I felt. I listened to two of the major pro players being interviewed, and the interviewer said, I have one last question for you before he went away at the end of this interview. And they were two different sports, and they were at the peak. They were at the pinnacle of those sports. You'd know them if I told you their names. And he said, what do you think about coaching, being coached? And they said, we can't get enough of it at this level. We desperately need it because all the nuances in our game demand it, but we can't find people to coach us most of the time.
Yeah.
And a coach never gets to put his foot on the field. So I used to say to my team, I can be in shape, I can know the other team, I can be prepared, I can know the strategy for the game, I can be ready, but I can't play the game. You're the only ones that can be on the field.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the coach does. The coach comes alongside, just like the nurturer, and he's saying, this is what I see, these are options, here's some vehicles you could use, this is another way to work out, you can strengthen your ankle this way, or get ready for the game this way, or whatever.
I think the nurturing role, and you got to tell me if I'm wrong on this, that one seems more organic. There's people in your life who, by relationship, can serve in that purpose. I think the coach one seems to be a role that sometimes you have to seek out.
You do.
Mentorship, therapist, counselor, coach, consultant. And I think where it seems to me people come up short is, in order for this to be effective, you have to give somebody access and authority in your life. You have to give someone the right to challenge you, to speak into your situation, to lay before you things that would challenge you in a healthy way. And it's interesting that I think sometimes Hollywood has this better figured out than the church. You can see it in the cast of shows. If you think of like Rocky, he has Adrian, the nurturer, and Mickey, the coach. Star Wars, you've got Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi helping out, Luke Skywalker in a sense. The necessity of those roles, but I do think this one is, it requires more intentionality, more humility, and you taking the initiative.
I think you're right. I think that is, you've got to want to be coached, right? I didn't want to be coached when I was a young player, and I missed a great opportunity to be a better ball player as a result. And at the end of my, quote, career, which was, didn't go very far, but anyway, at the end of my career, I was finally ready to be coached, and I was done. And I just thought, man, you stepped all over your feet,
Wow.
in the process. I had an opportunity for somebody to come alongside and really help develop me, and I could have been a better player. I played naturally and got away with it a lot of times. But this is the fierce independence piece when we avoid that in some way. And what I say to pastors a lot of times, okay, so who's your pastor?
Yeah.
Because every pastor needs a pastor.
That's right.
And very few pastors have one.
Like a genuine one.
A genuine one.
Yep.
That's outside of the circle of their
A lot of
immediate.
surfacey relationships,
That's right.
but like.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so if you just step back just a little bit, we're designed to be in this relational community that feeds healthiness rather than illness and sickness. And this is about hiding things. This is about exposing things. And a coach helps expose them in some way. So when you make, like you say, when I ask you, when I give you some accountability in my life, some authority in my life, some access to my life, some place that I can get feedback from you, I wanted my elder board to give me feedback about my sermons.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't do it. It was just crazy making. By the way, I did find some people that were more than willing to give me feedback. Yeah. I wasn't always happy about it, but at least I got it, But it wasn't the others.
I've never had to really solicit for feedback. I tend to just
Get it?
get it.
Well, that's amazing. I don't know, maybe my stance or something. I don't know what I did, but I just think good feedback's really hard to get.
Yeah.
And the higher you go in an organization, the more stratified the organization is, the more difficult it is to get honest, integrous, substantive feedback that's really helpful, strategy-wise and for the whole organization. And it takes a growing sense of self to be able to do that. Otherwise, you're going to be down here defending yourself in some way.
Yeah. Wow, that's so good.
And justification is down here. People justify all the time, and they have excuses, and those would be down here on this bottom triangle. Up on the top are maybe an explanation for what happened, but no excuse, because I'm still working on taking ownership.
Yeah. And it all comes back to this idea of humility.
That's
like
right.
This is a humble process.
To move up, to be up here is humble. Jim Collins wrote this book, Good to Great, about organizations, and then he wrote another book about NCOs, or nonprofits, and he found the same thing. The greatest leaders had the same two qualities. They were fierce learners across the board, constantly, both learning about their organization and the people in it and the industry and just general learning. And then he said the second thing was, they were so humble they seemed shy. That's pretty amazing, actually. Yeah. But it should be true of every discipline, it seems like to me. A true scientist should be humbled by his discipline because it's so much bigger than he is.
Yeah.
And look at what we're doing today. We've got AI coming that thinks quicker than most people can think. And I just wrote a little article about artificial intelligence, and this one guy said he thinks in 10 years, most people's best friend will be a robot, because it'll be the one that makes you feel the best, reads you the quickest, adapts to your own personality and idiosyncrasies and whatever else. And
Someone who fits perfectly with all your imperfections.
We found it with therapy. We've had robot therapists that actually make people, quote unquote, feel better than a normal therapist does. My goal is not to make you feel better. My goal is to make you better.
Yeah, that is terrifying. What it does is it immediately dwarfs our development.
That's right.
There's no iron sharpen iron, and we're losing the ability to dialogue. We're losing the ability to be in relationship with people who are different, think different, and the idea that like an AI robot would be a person's best friend, and the fact that that's becoming a goal is
Absolutely.
just alarming to me.
It's terrifying, actually. And the good side of it, the beauty of that technology.
Tell me what the good side of that is.
Well, the beauty of the technology is that it moves the technological world along, So, like, my wife went and had a crown put in her mouth, and she's got more money in her mouth than we have in the bank. But this last crown took 40 minutes to make, and it used to take 40 days, right? And that's the beauty of the speed at which computers work and technology.
Yeah, but I think my frustration, I could be wrong about this, but I watched this thing recently and they were showing how there's these AI platforms that can just spit content out.
Absolutely.
So this guy was like, hey, check this out. And he's like, I want to write a song. I want it to be a Christian song, and I want it to be, worship genre, and I want it to be about the cross. And he fills out this little thing, and then he hits submit, and within seconds,
here it is.
It spits out a theologically correct song that was pretty good. It's like, yeah, I could hear us singing that. But what frustrated me about it is somebody surrendered their artistic ability. Someone forfeited their God-given potential to participate in the art, and instead they just clicked a button. And it just drove me crazy. And I seen the same thing with someone was showing how you could write a book really quickly doing this.
Well, plagiarize.
And it was just maddening.
Okay, so here's a piece of the puzzle that I just think is enormous, actually, if we can capture it. Healthy people are unpredictable. Pathology, sick people are predictable. And that seems counterintuitive and just the opposite. So every time I get with somebody that has some kind of addictive quality, whether they're addicted to alcohol or drugs or sex or pornography or food or shopping or prayer, it doesn't matter what they are addicted to. Yeah. The addiction cycle is the same. It's boring. So I would say all pathology is boring and predictable, and all health is unpredictable. Well, what the AI will do is it's based on guessing predictability in a human, and it will make its adaptation to that because we can gather, reams of data about people or how they think, et cetera. And so the frightening part is we're going to have a whole culture that can't write, for instance, because they've never had to think or generate anything unique or personal or whatever. It took me years to learn how to read poetry, because poetry is this substantive use of language to describe a mystery, basically. And I think it's why we are uncomfortable with poetry a lot of times, because we don't get the mystery. We want it to be clear and concise and, tidy and useful and cute and rhythmic and whatever else. And real poetry challenges you to think outside the box and stretches your language use and all that kind of stuff. Well, AI is working in opposition to that, but I don't think it's bad in and of itself in a moral sense. I think we're the ones that have to grow up enough to utilize the strengths of it and minimize the destructive side.
Wow.
But any tool that's strong needs protection.
Yeah, and the church tends to make mistakes there. Whenever
Absolutely.
there's an advancement, we disengage and we pull out of the conversation, we pull out of the context, and then what happens is we re-engage when we're comfortable, but then we have to play moral catch-up. And it's like, hey, we disengage from this, and now it's become a thing, and now we're comfortable, but we've lost our influence, and now we've got to.
That's right. So if the uniqueness of being human is not just that we're conscious beings, but that we are designed like God to be creative and imaginative, and I don't think we do much to redeem our imaginations. I mean, to have redemptive imagination, if you will. I think the church has kind of lost that capacity,
for sure.
and so that's the disturbing part of beauty. You know, art, in my mind, should always be disturbing by definition. But so often it's not. I mean, I go to church a lot of times, and it's neutral. It doesn't disturb me.
Yeah.
And I don't remember it, you know. And even as a pastor, I've preached a dozen sermons. I don't remember it at all. And I think, wow, I studied that and wrote it down and delivered it, and I still don't remember it, you know. Why? Because it was neutral.
Yeah.
And when
It amazes me how much people overlook the artistry of God. And I don't know if that's just a westernized way of thinking. We like things in cute boxes, and we like things to be very systematized. But if God is anything, he's an artist. He's creative.
And he's surprising.
Yeah.
And we want him to be predictable rather than unique. And I think we keep going to him in a predictable, mechanical kind of a way, and in a what I would call a legal kind of a way, wanting to pin him down and say, this is what you promised, you know, and I can, and you failed me, versus being in relationship with him, which is variable and surprising. And, you know, I'm surprised all the time by my own family, and then if I'm honest, I'm surprised by me if I'm paying attention.
Yeah.
I think, where did that come from, for pity's sakes? Why are you thinking that way, and why are you doing this? And hello, who are you? You know, show up here.
So for every single one of us, it's to say, hey, stop blaming, stop justifying, start owning, start participating, and just allow your development to be a priority and something that you just commit to.
And here, you can't be everything to everybody. Sorry. Even though that's kind of a phrase that Paul uses, I'm taking it out of context.
Yeah.
That's why humility sits here. Gentle and humble. Only the strong can be gentle. And I learned that teaching disabled people. Disability doesn't necessarily demand you be handicapped.
Yeah.
Right? So I taught in a visually handicapped field for a while, and what I learned is that they don't feel handicapped, especially if they've been visually impaired their whole life. Handicap is something we put on them, not they have. And it's just crazy. Wow. I mean, I had a teacher that was blind, and she just ran all over the campus, and I mean, she was amazing, but she would not allow her disability to be handicapping. And so I think a lot of times we just say, well, oh my gosh, you can't recover from that. And most people would I probably would crawl up in the corner and just wilt, you know. But people that take ownership say, this is what I've got, I'm gonna go with it.
Yeah, that's so good.